These things are pretty big, and that's why we as professional drivers are trained to handle and control them. It's our experience and expertise that keep us on the road and help us to anticipate and avoid problems with less experienced motorists. But there's something even bigger than us out there, something with more power and energy than even 100 trucks put together. And we come across them all the time on the roads and highways we use every day. It's trains, at least 12 million pounds of thundering locomotives, freight and passengers. That's 6,000 tons. Think about it for a minute. A typical freight train going just 55 miles an hour can take a mile or more to stop. That's the length of 18 football fields. So when we cross paths, we have to look out for them. And you'd think it'd be easy. After all, how can you miss spotting something that big? Yet all you have to do is turn on the news or open the paper, and you see many tragic incidents between trains and trucks. And if you think these incidents are concentrated on just the rookies, think again. Statistics don't lie. Crashes between trucks and trains run the gamut from the 2-year rookie all the way up through the seasoned pro who's been driving for 30 years. Look, we all have an investment of our own time and money in our training as well as our ongoing careers. What you're about to see are real scenarios that affect each and every one of us. These situations are the most common that we encounter. Only the names have been changed to protect privacy. So when it comes to crossing paths with trains, all of us can take a second to gain a little knowledge that can help us stay alive when we drive.
Sometimes it's not the driving that'll get you, it's the stopping. When approaching a crossing that has no white pavement line present, pro drivers use the 15-50 rule of thumb. This means stop no closer to the nearest rail than the average car length, which is 15 feet, and no further than 50 feet in order to maintain good sight distance. Pretty simple stuff. What makes it tricky is that not all railroad crossings are the same. Some have an advance warning sign, which does just what you'd think. It tells you that a crossing is coming up. When you get to the actual crossing, sometimes there are pavement markings, and sometimes there aren't. And then there's the crossbuck, reminding us that it's our responsibility to yield to trains. Remember, we can stop our rigs a whole lot faster than that train can be stopped. But these signs, or lack of them, are only half the story. Because only you can make the judgment call about how much space you need for the rig you're driving. When driving an extended van or panel truck, you have a longer vehicle than the cars around you. So in order to safely clear any railroad crossing, you've got to account for this extra length. Now, crank that up to a new semi or a double, and you're talking at least an extra 53 feet of vehicle behind you that you have to allow for in order to ensure a safe crossing. And from rookie to pro, underestimating this is one of the biggest causes of incidents involving trains. This judgment is a combination of your training, experience, skill, and alertness as a professional driver. After all, that's why we're called professionals. Here's a situation that poses a lot of problems. Multiple tracks. When approaching a crossing that has 2 or more tracks, it's more than just looking both ways. Just because the coast is clear, remember that you have yet another condition to keep in mind, namely the length of the trailer you're hauling behind you. You not only have to clear the first set of tracks safely with both your cab and trailer, you've got to do it again, right away, for every set of tracks at the crossing. Timing this movement is made extra complicated when you allow for the distance your truck needs to cover in order to cross safely. Professional drivers know that the extra time we allow ourselves to navigate these multi-track crossings is often a matter of life and death, and that's the way we treat it every time we encounter it. A humped crossing and a lowboy just don't mix. Some crossings, especially older, smaller ones and ones in tight, congested traffic areas, are higher than the roadbed leading up to them. They have a hump in them where the tracks cross the roadway. It poses a problem for you when you're trying to navigate these crossings, especially when pulling a lowboy. Know your clearance when you're approaching one of these crossings. Sure, it might take a little time to reroute down to the next level crossing, but getting stuck on a humped crossing can have a tragic outcome. And it's not just lowboys that get snagged at these crossings. You'd be surprised how many semis get stuck in humped crossings, even if they aren't riding low. You know the biggest culprit? Dolly legs. That's right. Something as simple as failing to retract your dolly legs all the way into the up position once you're loaded has caused more truck and train collisions than you'd imagine. And this one's even true for seasoned pros. We become so caught up in the routine of loading and unloading that we overlook or simply forget this critical step. And it's always when you forget something like this that it rears its ugly head and causes you a world of trouble. So lowboy or not, remember when approaching a humped crossing, we all need to avoid being a lowrider.
There are a few situations where knowing the rules can not only save you some fines, but also help you avoid bigger trouble like a collision.
Like if you come upon a railroad crossing and there's an official flagman, such as a law enforcement officer or official railroad employee. Well, at this point, that person becomes a traffic control device. Your first allegiance in this situation is to carefully follow their directions, because they are in control of the crossing and all of the traffic moving through it. Okay, speaking of hazardous, that brings us to number 2. Hauling hazardous materials. This one is very clear. If you have a hazmat placard on your truck, you must stop before attempting to cross at a railway intersection. It's also a good idea to use your hazard flashers. Once you've come to a stop, then proceed with extreme caution once you have determined the coast to be clear. And while we're talking about clearance, let's talk about the space taken up by a train. Just because your tires are clear of the tracks doesn't mean you're safe. Here's why. The train cars overhang the rails on each side of the train. This overhang space is at least 3 feet on each side, so keep this in mind when timing any crossing you make over railroad tracks.
Okay, that's all for avoiding problems, but what about if you find yourself in the middle of a problem?
Let's say you get stuck on the tracks for whatever reason. It happens nearly every day all across the nation. Okay, first, get out of your vehicle. Then, to minimize everyone's risk, you've got a friend at the crossing. Look for the sign posted near the crossing. It includes the emergency number you should call right away. This will not only get some help on the way to you, but the message will also go out to all trains in the area, alerting them of the crossing you are blocking. Remember, it takes a mile or more to stop a 12 million pound train, so the quicker you call, the sooner word can get out to help avoid a much bigger problem. If a train is approaching, move away from the crossing towards the train so you won't be hit by debris. Because when a train and a truck meet at a crossing, the debris can be enormous and deadly. Another common situation we find ourselves in involves the railroad crossing gates. Now, you know better than to try and go around a gate. But what about when you are partway through a crossing and the gate activates and comes down on your truck? It's 2 quick steps to take. First, get your truck off the crossing. If you can't, then get yourself out of your rig and away from the crossing to avoid debris. And next, call the police or emergency number posted near the crossing.
With a good grasp of these rules and guidelines, you can further ensure that your truck and a train don't ever meet at the crossroads. Sometimes, even the most careful professionals come up against the unexpected. Here are a few events that challenged even our very best.
7:40 p.m. on a rain-slicked Thursday night. Traffic was light, and our driver was on the final leg of a 14-stop tour. As he approached the crossing near his home base, a crossing he'd driven over hundreds of times before, the rain started picking up. In this industrial part of the city, the mercury vapor lights of nearby warehouses flashed into his field of vision through the rain-soaked windshield. Thunder was rolling in the background, and the rain was falling hard on the pavement. The sound of an approaching train was masked with the constant hiss of the pelting downpour. Visibility was poor, but sticking his head out of the window into the weather wasn't high on our driver's list of desires that evening. Tired, hungry, cold, and anxious to finish up and get home, the crossing loomed up in the blackness. But just as he was about to push through, that sixth sense of experience started scratching in the back of his head. Our driver knew better than to cut a corner, even this late into the game on what had been a rough 2-week tour with the finish yard in sight. And it's a good thing, because when he went the extra mile and stuck his head out into the wind and rain, he realized his effort had just saved his life and the lives of many others. Then there's the case of the oversized load carrier, hauling a giant water tank for a municipal water service. Not only was the added weight throwing off her stopping power, but the crosswinds caused the extra weight of the tank to do very strange things to the way her rig handled that she'd never experienced before. As if this wasn't enough, there was the extended flatbed she was pulling that made negotiating on regular roads all the more difficult. When she came to the sharp humped crossing, she decided to play it safe and not risk bottoming out. If she hadn't taken into consideration what she was hauling and diverted to a smoother crossing for her rig, the few extra minutes of time she took wouldn't have been any trade for a disastrous ending. Whether it's a giant water tank, a load of logs, a manufactured house, or a windmill blade, oversized loads are one of the trickiest hauls we'll ever make, and they require extra special attention from portal to portal, especially when train crossings line the path. Lastly, let's look at all of the distractions a modern-day driver has to contend with each and every time they pull out onto the road. It's no longer just a CB and an 8-track tape of Merle Haggard. No, today's modern drivers have an arsenal of electronic gadgets at their disposal to enable them to make their journey more efficient and comfortable. But when you factor in the CB, the pagers, the heart-pumping stereo system, the GPS programming unit and displays, and even laptop computers, you've got a multitude of hidden hazards waiting to occur that increase the odds of a fatal mistake. And not one single device has the sheer destructive power of the modern cell phone. From phone calls, Bluetooth accessories, video chat, and especially text messaging, the cell phone holds the power to distract professional drivers like no other electronic device. When you mix these distractions in with the extra attention it requires to safely tackle a railroad crossing, the outcome can have dire consequences.
So whether it's bad weather, an oversized load, or dangerous distractions, take the time to recognize what you'll be up against before every trip. A little safety planning, some common sense, and your professional driving experience is what makes us the best of the best. The power we work with every day is something we earn the right to with every safe and successful mile we put under our wheels. As truckers, we thread goods and supplies to every artery of the nation's backbone. But all of us have to take a step back and marvel at the sheer might a modern locomotive generates. By working in tandem, we each play a pivotal role in the nation's daily transportation and commerce demands. So when you take into account these two forces, you see why it's absolutely critical to take the steps to be proactive in ensuring that our paths never cross in unplanned ways. Railroad crossings are as necessary as those of us who cross them thousands of times per day as we strive to haul and deliver our loads on schedule with maximum efficiency. So remember that a train by its very nature can never stop for us. So it's up to us to stop for them. It's a crucial part of our job to minimize the risks associated when trucks and trains come together. It's what makes us unique. It's what makes us a critical link in the lives of everyone we know. It's what gives us the title of professional drivers. So stay alive when you drive.